Hello, and welcome back to It's Bigger Than Biotech. I'm Hriday, Executive Director of True Drug Pharma and a student at the University of Southern California.
And I'm Vishnu, a software engineer and machine learning and neuroscience researcher, aspiring to be a neurotech entrepreneur, also here at SC. Joining us today is Chloe Duckworth, a multifaceted professional with a diverse background spanning neuroscience, technology, and social impact. Chloe's journey in the world of neurotechnology and artificial intelligence has led her to become the co-founder and CEO of Valence Vibrations, an early-stage voice AI company specializing in affective computing. Chloe's passion for leveraging technology to make a positive impact extends beyond her work at Valence Vibrations. In June 2020, she co-founded Hopehearted, a nonprofit organization dedicated to distributing PPE kits to unhoused people across California. This initiative, backed by major retailers like Costco and Target, demonstrates Chloe's commitment to addressing pressing social issues. Chloe's academic background is equally impressive, graduating from USC with a BS in computational neuroscience, having worked as a research assistant at the University of Southern California, where she contributed to developing models of neuronal circuits and created tools for visualizing brain data.
Hi, Chloe. Thank you so much for being on It's Bigger Than Biotech and taking the time to speak with us today. We really appreciate it. And you're truly impressive. I have to say, you've accomplished so much already, and we hope to learn more about you and your experiences today.
Thank you. Thank you both for having me. Excited to be here.
Definitely. I mean, we're happy to have you on. And I just want to start us off by asking about your role specifically at Valence Vibrations.
So at Valence, co-founder CEO, started Valence back when I was in college at USC, sort of that weird COVID generation of college students. Went to college for 6 months. COVID shut everything down, and we had to pivot and start augmenting our college experience in new ways in digital settings. And I started entering a number of hackathons across neuroscience, medtech, biotech. Was really interested in ways to augment the sense of wellness and human prosperity across disabled and low socioeconomic status populations that have less natural access to wellness. And so worked on a reminiscence therapy app for dementia prior to launching Valence. That's a fun story for later. We ended up having an acquisition deal fall through at the last minute, and that was a really painful early lesson in entrepreneurship. And then that led to starting Valence, initially as a consumer product, helping disabled folks from autistic to ADHD people better interpret sound as a sort of emotional pulse check on a haptic wristband. So you can literally feel the vibe of the room, the emotional valence of it, hence the name Valence, as a tangible sensory augmentation signal on an Apple Watch. And then from there, ended up launching enterprise voice AI, and that brought us to where we're at now. We sell vocal tone analysis models and APIs for conversational intelligence. And really the goal is how can we improve emotional understanding across screens and across different demographics and unique voices of people. So we plug into contact centers, video conferencing platforms, and other sort of enterprise communication use cases to help people better understand each other.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely phenomenal. All this just coming out of a hackathon really shows you the impact of building in university. It's a dream for most to just come out of a hackathon and release into a massive company. But I wanted to ask you, since this transition was almost from a student to a professional in the industry, what was that transition like? Because they're usually like people go through internships to kind of introduce them to industry work. How was it for you?
I would say I had a unique experience. So first, as I mentioned with COVID, I did have one internship prior to starting my company and sort of around the same time as starting Hopehearted, the nonprofit that Vishnu mentioned. My internship was for a neurotech nonprofit called Brain Minds. Their goal is to incubate high impact neuroscience bench to bedside and be able to sort of negate the valley of death within neuroscience investing, where there's really a high impact human-centered neuroscience technology that could make a substantial impact in society, but maybe doesn't necessarily meet venture scale outcomes, or for some reason is being overlooked by traditional venture capital. And so we sort of broker those connections from Silicon Valley giants to very credible neuroscientists and neuroengineers to be able to incubate that talent. And from that lens, I was able to really understand a lot about startups, neuroscience, neurotech industry in general, because it's so different from what you hear from your professors that are working in academia, and most of them have never worked in industry jobs. So I think having that lens really lended itself well into starting my company at 19, having, little experience practically in the industry compared to my peers. I would also say that we certainly rode the wave of the AI innovation that's occurred in the last 3 years. And I think that we timed the market just right, where we had launched some of our initial voice models before the initial ChatGPT launch. And then once ChatGPT launched, the buzz surrounding at first text-based models, but really generative models and sort of conversational AI models in general has been super helpful for helping us kind of gain our footing in the market. And despite being young, green founders, we're very technical, and we're able to see that catalyst within the market and kind of take advantage of that moment to showcase how we need emotional intelligence in standard language models and standard conversational analytics models. But I would say the transition was hard. To be honest, for any students or young professionals that are looking to swap into a career in this field, especially starting your own company at a young age while you're still in school, it's challenging. I always say you can do it all, but you can't do it all at once. There were a lot of sacrifices that Shannon, my co-founder, and myself had to make to be able to do what we were doing. As 19-year-old college students, we weren't the people that were going to every tailgate and frat party and football game. We were heads down building and studying, and that took up our life for our entire college experience pretty much, as well as our lives now as young 20-somethings. And so that looks very different than the sort of average college trajectory. And it takes a special kind of person to be able to honestly be willing to put up with that much suffering and ambiguity. It's a really stressful period of your life where you are going to hear no from investors and customers hundreds and hundreds of times, having to fire people, having to just ride the ups and downs of starting a company at this age. It's difficult, and you have to be ready. And I mean, you never truly can be ready. It was nothing like what I expected, but I think that it takes a certain type of disposition to be able to handle that level of rejection constantly and still wake up every morning and have such conviction in yourself that you're able to move forward. It's almost a level of insanity to be able to believe in yourself that much when so many other people don't in those early stages. And that's truly the hallmark of a founder.
All right. So you talked about, I guess, recruiting into internships, right? For example, BrainMind. And I also touched upon the lab research that you did. So we want to delve more into that. What was the recruitment process like for you to get these opportunities, and what do you feel helped you the most?
Sure. Gosh, it's been years now. I would say I had a very different background going into these opportunities. So I didn't necessarily go through a normal recruitment process because I already had some entrepreneurship experience applying for BrainMind. And so I went through the normal rounds of interviews. What I would say is for BrainMind and for every other major opportunity that I've gotten in my life, I haven't followed the traditional apply on LinkedIn or apply on Indeed. And I would recommend anyone listening to not do that either. And go through their process if they need you to dot their I's, but make yourself stand out by directly reaching out to hiring managers, to stakeholders within these companies, and try to learn from them as much as you can, and differentiate yourself as someone that is smart and is willing to do a lot of tedious work in order to get an opportunity. You want to present yourself as someone that's young and hungry to make a difference in the world and take the opportunity that's in front of you. And you don't do that by applying and writing a cover letter, and I've never gotten a good opportunity from doing anything like that. Similar to labs, I had emailed a professor with interest in his research project and asked some pointed questions, and he at the time didn't have any students in his lab, and so he was really interested in bringing me on, and we developed a mentor-mentee relationship, and now we're friends as well. And I would say, you do have to get really good at writing cold messages. So many of my best shots in life have come from an initial cold outreach, from customers to investors to mentors. And so that is my best advice. Like, practice making yourself uncomfortable and reaching out to people who you admire and want to learn from. Maybe some of the guests in this podcast, for example, as you're listening, and come in humble, low ego, with a lot of interest. And especially as a student, professionals are so willing to help you and to hop on a call and guide you. There's something in it for us when we feel like we can mentor a student and see them into greatness. Vishnu has been my mentee for, I think 2 years now. You reached out to me prior to applying to USC, and I told you about the computational neuroscience program. And, I love doing stuff like that. I have a whole sort of group of students that I regularly mentor. And so that is my best advice. Don't do the standard things that everyone else is doing, because then you're just basically guaranteeing your resume is going to get thrown in a pile, and maybe they'll read it, maybe they won't.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. I really like how you touched upon, I guess, cold outreaching to professionals, and lots of professionals do want to help, right? So I'd like to ask you a question. Do you have any specific story about a professional or mentor that you want to talk about who helped you a lot just through a cold outreach?
Sure. I actually have a really great one that I love talking about. David Eagleman, he's the CEO of Neosensory, and they are a sensory augmentation company that helps deaf and hard of hearing people interpret sound as vibration. So that was where the idea for the initial consumer app for Vibes came from. And we came out of their hackathon. Now, how I initially met him, I was in high school and I was attending a summer internship at Stanford in their neuroscience. It was like CNIX, cognitive neuroscience internship. It was in Stanford Medical School's psychiatry department. And David came in and gave like a 2-hour long talk to this internship program. And I was just enthralled by him. I remember I came up and asked him for his autograph in my notebook, and went and read all of his books that summer. I was just so inspired. He let me try on the earliest version of their haptic wristband at the time, and they hadn't launched it yet, the Buzz product. And so later on in college, I cold emailed him when I was working for BrainMind, because we had a specific assignment to cold email like 10 people a week to try to take as many networking calls as possible to try to find our next internship or opportunity, which honestly, I highly recommend to anyone listening. And that cold email completely changed my life. Without reaching out to him, I never would have found out about the hackathon. I never would have started this company in the way that I did, at least. And the funniest part is that I almost missed the email. So I sent him the email and his assistant responded. But because his assistant responded from a new email address, it went automatically to my spam folder and I never checked it. And I thought that he just didn't answer, but he ended up answering. And then his assistant pinged it again and said, Chloe, he'd love to meet with you. So he emailed me twice, and I completely ghosted him for 2 weeks. And then I found it in my spam folder and responded, I'm so sorry. I don't know how I missed this. It's such an important message. So first piece of advice, send the cold email. You're literally one cold email away from changing your life. Second piece of advice, check your spam folder if you're sending out cold messages. So that's my little story.
Yeah, I mean, those are definitely gems you gave our audience right now. I mean, it's the power of just meeting one person could change the trajectory of your career, honestly. I know recruiting, you mentioned you don't take the conventional path, which is actually super unique insight, because most people just think apply on LinkedIn, apply to 500 of them, you'll get one. You just need one. It's a numbers game, but I feel like a personalized touch to it would really, really improve your chances and improve the quality of opportunities you get. But talking about the recruitment process overall in the industry right now, what do you think are the pros and cons of how recruiting works right now, and how would you change that?
So I can talk about how we do it. I think one of the main problems with recruiting right now is it's not necessarily meritocratic. And I think We talk about meritocracy in a number of different ways. There's a lot of DEI backlash. People say that the existence of DEI programs is anti-meritocracy, but to say something like that assumes that we had a meritocracy to start with. And in a country where a few hundred years ago, Black folks were enslaved, clearly we don't have a meritocracy and never did in this country. Just the current backlash against DEI initiatives, in my view, is incredibly problematic in technology. The recent McKinsey and Lean In report that published gaps in gender-based hiring, for example, showed that first gap in being hired to being essentially promoted the first time within technology is the single largest gap in gender. So women and men are getting hired at approximately the same rates. I encourage anyone to look at the Lean In report. Based off of graduation rates to that first job, it is fairly equal. But if you look at that first promotion for white women, especially for Black women of color, incredibly divergent. So that is a huge problem that we need to fix within recruiting. And that goes into bias training, that goes into just the way that we source talent. A big thing that I've noticed and experienced when I was applying for internships prior to starting my companies is that if you don't belong to these kind of like high net worth, highly networked groups, it's very difficult to break in to get your first opportunity. And I think that a lot of college students, especially ones that don't come from a world of wealth and connections, I certainly didn't. It's incredibly difficult to feel like you can break into those really valuable opportunities where it feels like your peers are getting internships at big companies because one of their parents happens to work there or manages the team that they're on. And it's very frustrating. And so I would say that the best way to combat that, if you're an applicant or a student trying to go through the recruitment process, is to do the hungry, tedious work of exactly what I was talking about, networking. And like when you don't have that network yourself, you have to build it from the ground up. And it's certainly not fair. And employers like myself and other, larger tech companies that have much higher hiring budgets and recruitment budgets than I do need to be advocates in changing the system along the way. But for applicants that can't alone change the system, it's very important to build out your network to be able to find those champions and sponsors of you in these companies and have them refer you in. And sometimes it's not the first person you reach out to, but it's the person's friend or that person's friend's friend. I've gone like 5th degree connections that have given me incredible opportunities that I had to keep going. Or you meet with someone and they say, let me introduce you to my friend that knows about this. And then that person introduces you to 3 people. And then it just keeps going, and it's this incredible chain reaction. We've gotten investors that way. I would say most of our investors came that way, actually. I do the same thing for people all the time where I introduce them to my friends that I think can be helpful. You're only a couple of degrees away from meeting any one person that you're really interested in once you really get networked into your industry. And so I think that that's the best way to overcome some of these more systemic biases that we're unfortunately not able to fix as individuals that are trying to apply and get our first opportunity.
All right, wait, that sounds great. I understand that connections really do help in every scenario, regardless of if you're a startup founder or you're going through the recruitment process for a big or smaller company. And I understand that really starts, especially during your university days, right? That's when you meet lots of people. That's when you're pushed to be social. So, and I also understand that you worked at the Han Lab, which is phenomenal. So while at USC, you were building towards the Human Connectome project, right? Could you explain more about that, how that specifically may have helped you, and your thoughts on the importance of research experience for healthcare industry roles or health tech roles?
Sure. Again, this was a number of years ago, but the work with the Han Lab was specifically looking at first behavioral traits within rats based off of certain gene expression. And then once COVID shut everything down, we had to look at more functional mapping and structural mapping across brain, human, rat, and mouse brains, and directly connected into the Connectome project. So what that means is we're mapping all of the neuronal and non-neuronal connections in the human mouse and rat brain, drawing flat maps, and I created a couple of scripts to help researchers better visualize their genetic data, functional data, and other research data on these flat maps without having to recreate the maps themselves. So that was a lot of my early work, which was broadly under the umbrella of the Connectome project. What I would say is it's very important if you're going to enter a neuroscience or neurotech-based company that you have hands-on wet lab and computational research experience. I would say for most companies, both is excellent. And I would recommend that to students because I think that it's a very different skill set, even though you're looking at the same data just in different ways, using wet lab or more computational approaches. But it's important to understand like what kind of person you are and which is more interesting and easier for you. Like some people have great understanding of neuroanatomy, but when it comes to wet lab, like the skills required to conduct like a rat autopsy, it just doesn't apply to them. And so would recommend that in sort of like practical advice. But I think having those opportunities for me didn't directly yield to the job that I have now. You know, I'm working in emotion AI. It's very far removed from my early work, but it does build me my credibility when I'm coming to investors and sharing my background within computational neuroscience and explaining the earlier research that I did. And so it is important to have that as a foundation, regardless of the direct path that you want to go into. I wish that I had more time to explore research before starting my company, but unfortunately, you know, we kind of took off at a young age, and it was during COVID where a lot of the research that I was already doing in the lab was unfortunately shut down. A lot of the animal models unfortunately had to be euthanized, and so it was a very sad time for, you know, research and for the world as a whole for a lot of other reasons. But it was a difficult time for wet lab research.
All right. So you talked about, I guess, lab experience and research experience really contributing to the work that specific people do in neurotechnology companies, whether it comes to wet lab or dry lab. And you also talked about the credibility that it builds for you specifically as a founder going up to investors. Can you dig deeper into how that credibility works, and specifically in emotional AI as well? How do you show to investors or people you're pitching to, or even recruiting, that you are, like, I guess, credible in the space?
Totally. It's huge. It's huge. And it's huge, especially for young founders that like I don't have a track record of taking companies 0 to 1 before. I've recruited a team that does. I've recruited advisors that do. But really it's me. It's me and my co-founder at the end of the day. And it's our reputation that we have to be able to prove to the investors that we understand this space better than anyone else in terms of the exact product that we're building in the market that we're building it in. And so part of that is like being able to come to the conversation showing that I'm a smart technical person. And that's where sharing my computational neuroscience background and some of the research that I did in the past helps. I will say, like, getting into the specifics, no one has asked me and really cared. Because I'm not building a hard neuroscience company, what I mean by that is we're in AI and there's neuroscientific implications of emotion perception and how that is modeled computationally. It's not a direct neuroscience company in the way that we're marketing it now as an enterprise AI company. And so because of that, they want to see that, again, I'm a smart technical person and that I have like a defensible degree. But at the end of the day, it's much more about showcasing my knowledge of our product and market rather than looking at direct points on a resume, because I haven't scaled a company in this market before. And so while people are impressed by my background, it's been much more about my entrepreneurial background that has mattered more than specific research studies that I did, which honestly, I've never been asked about.
Yeah, I mean, the credibility and building it seems like that really helped you a lot with your investors, because yeah, if you're putting money on someone or a startup, you need to make sure they know what they're doing. You also mentioned that starting a startup while you were 19 required a lot of sacrifices, especially to your life at university and that overall experience. Keeping that in mind, what would you have done differently at university to kind of set you up for your company, or even from the experience that you have now? Would you have done it differently?
I don't know that I would have. I didn't have a business background from university, but honestly, I think that the technical classes that I took in the short time that I was there were way higher yield for me than taking business classes. I'm certainly jaded, but I think that the value of hard science degrees is much, much more valuable than any direct business degree that you can receive, especially with MBAs. I think right now there's kind of and this is controversial, but I think that within my field and within most entrepreneurs that are the ones actually starting their own companies and developing the technology, like Shannon and I, it's more recommended to lean into hard technical backgrounds than getting a more like business generalist background, unless you want to join a growing startup as like a CFO or biz dev person. But when you want to be the actual like brains and sort of growth experts behind a company, I think you need to start from the ground up on science and figure out the business stuff later with the right advisors, because quite honestly, that part is way easier to like learn along the way. And when you're proving yourself to be the smart, credible person, you're able to pick up sales sense and sort of business modeling specifics. If you can model the human brain computationally, you can certainly figure out a financial model on Excel. Similar skill set. It's a complicated process, and that's not to negate any of the difficulty in folks that spend all of their time doing that. Those skills are definitely transferable if you are smart with data science. And so I'm happy that I did it the way that I did. I've had other people that I know and was coming up with in sort of my same generation of entrepreneurs at USC that did the opposite to me. They leaned into less technical backgrounds and tried to be a business generalist and start kind of a fun idea. Maybe it's a consumer social product. There's, a lot of dating apps, a lot of friend making apps, matchmaking, and trying to do that as a business student and raise venture based off of just an idea when you don't have traction behind it is much harder when you're a generalist than if you're a technologist or someone with like deep experience within hard science that you're trying to create new IP. It's a lot easier to raise capital for a company like that with just an idea. And so, it's still hard right now for everyone in terms of raising early capital. But when I've spoken to my earliest investors, they've all said, Chloe, like when we first invested, we were investing in you and Shannon and the potential that we thought that you have to be able to build a killing product, killing sort of product market fit, and be able to iterate based off of market feedback quickly. We weren't investing in traction that we didn't have. And I think for more generalist folks, they have to invest in traction because they don't have the same level of like defensible IP to be selling to investors.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a very fresh perspective on like what degree that people should choose. Of course, it's based on their skill set, what they enjoy. But yeah, like I've also heard from like a lot of people that hard science backgrounds are better than business generalist backgrounds. And again, yeah, I do agree. It's a very controversial opinion, and I
It
need to sway decision on whether they should take a business or a science degree. Both of them are good. It depends on what you want to do with it.
It does. But I will say, like, even, hedge funds and PEs, like they're hiring deep science backgrounds as advisors to figure out a lot of the complicated math that they're doing right now. So even in the deepest elements of the financial system, we're hiring people with very technical backgrounds. So, and a lot of them are actually physics backgrounds, not neuroscience. I would say physics is a few steps further in terms of like the rigor of the degree in most universities. And that's an excellent place to start it, even if you want to go into business. So that is my hot take. There are hundreds to thousands of people per large university like USC that are getting a business degree every year. They have very similar backgrounds. They're getting internships at the same places. A lot of them that are getting the best internships have inside connections to get said internships. And I think that, in this economy, especially with AI automation, you want to really be looking at like career defensibility in a way that our parents and our mentors didn't have to. And that's a huge thing. And so if you're getting the type of degree where a lot of the skills can be easily trained via AI in the next 5 years, then maybe that's not the best choice for you.
Yeah, I mean, talking about AI and job defensibility, like, talking about the broader trends in the neurotech space itself, what do you think the future of this specific industry is in general? And what do you think will be the next big breakthrough in this technology?
So, the last decade within neurotech, we've been trying to solve a lot of really difficult material science and hardware problems. And we still are solving them, but I think that we're closer than ever before. From microelectrodes, Utah arrays, to ECOG, electrochorography, to some of the other newer methods like ultrasonic stimulation, etc. I think that there's been great hardware advancements in the field right now. There's certainly biocompatibility issues that needs to be sorted out. We're seeing that play out in real time with the Neuralink trials and some of the other ones. I think we are really going to see a renaissance of neuro software in the next 5 years. Like, I think we're now at a place where our hardware is getting sufficiently advanced to be able to receive quality data. Then what do we do with it? It has never before been possible to receive the amount of data that we can now receive from a human brain live streamed in real time. What do we do with all this information? How do we make sense of it? How do we decode on a single neuron level what that means mapped to systems and functional data? I think there are certain systems, for example, the visual system and auditory conduction system that are very well mapped so that we understand what that direct pathophysiology looks like across disorders. And it's easier to map to a cochlear implant or a vision enhancement. But there's huge disparity across the brain in terms of the resolution of understanding in each system. And I think that data science and the sort of BCI revolution that we're in the midst of can answer a lot of those questions in a way that we weren't able to before. And so I'm really excited to see what that means for research and what that means for promoting human flourishing, what that means for treating and curing disease in a way that we never could before, from neurodegeneration to the whole spectrum of psychiatric neurological disorders. So I would say for folks that are really interested right now, like, get involved in software. There's certainly place for folks on the material science and hardware side. We need more physical engineers, of course, but I think that there are not enough neuroscientists that are leaning into software to be able to handle the level of data and the level of access that we now have to the human brain. And that's what I'm excited about in the next 5 years.
Honestly, that's wonderful. I think lots of people are going into the data science aspect of neuroscience. And I've heard this saying before where a neuroscientist is now a data scientist, right? Lots of them play around with data. When you have lots of data that's coming in, when you're enabled through hardware to get lots of data from the neuronal implants, etc., you need to process them. And I think I agree. That is kind of the next big thing. So let's move on to the last section of our podcast, where it's a rapid fire round where you can answer questions between one word and one sentence, but you can also go over by a bit. And yeah, there's a few questions.
Oh boy. All right. I'm excited.
So what topic in the neurotechnology industry do you love the most?
Systems neuroscience.
Okay. Let's ask a fun fact regarding your role. What do you love about your role?
Seeing customer reactions.
What do you dislike about your role?
Accounting.
Can you give us another interesting networking story that taught you a lot?
I only get a few words.
You can go.
Went to Masters of, I'm going to be brief, went to Masters of Scale 2 weeks ago, Reid Hoffman's conference, met incredible change makers there. And just like walking around the room, I was awestruck by like the caliber of folks there and was so humbled to be in that room, to be invited personally by the Masters of Scale team since I was on their podcast a few months ago. That was just my most recent sort of networking awestruck moment.
That's very cool. What is your favorite source of neurotechnology and healthcare industry related information?
I love neuro reports, like neuro views. Brain Mind is great. And then I also love following Paradromics and Synchron CEOs, Thomas Oxley and Matt. And so recommend following both of them.
Right. And last question, what is a wise quote that has stuck with you over the years?
Nice women seldom make history. I might be paraphrase, polite women seldom make history. I like that one.
That's
Yeah.
really cool. I think my mom would agree.
Thank you, Chloe, for being here. And that wraps up our episode with Chloe Duckworth on It's Bigger Than Biotech. Thank you for your insights, experiences, and sharing a little bit about the exciting projects you're working on. Your journey from studying computational neuroscience at USC to co-founding Valence Vibrations is a real inspiration to anyone entering the neurotechnology world. For our listeners, we hope you found Chloe's story as fascinating as we did, from her innovation or her innovative work on emotional communication technology to her passion for improving accessibility for neurodivergent individuals. There's so much we can take away about the power of curiosity, dedication, and endless possibilities in neurotechnology.
And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your friends or anyone interested in neurotechnology and AI innovation. Stay tuned for more incredible guests in future episodes, bringing you more from the world of science, tech, and beyond. Until next time, this is Vishnu signing off. Keep exploring, keep innovating, and remember, it's always bigger than biotech.